Heading into the middle of December, and we've got a mild pattern across much of the country. We are seeing 70s in Colorado and Kansas, but in the northeastern U.S., cold weather predominates. The global hotspot for today was Marie, Australia, 116 degrees. Yeah, that's definitely what I would call the Australian outback. Classic Dust Bowl type of town. And at the other extreme, the Siberian cold pole, Oymyakon, down to minus 69. And there's a photo of that area. Let's take a look at the weather around the country. We've got ridging from the Gulf of Mexico up to the Great Lakes. So fair skies from Houston to Chicago. In the plains, warming up with downslope flow from the Rockies, and those temperatures coming up into the 60s and 70s. On the East Coast, cold air advection as we have a frontal system offshore moving out into the Atlantic, and this is going to become quite deep. So we check it out on AWIPS. There it is, 991 millibars. That is a mature frontal system. And over the next couple days, that'll move towards the northeast off of Newfoundland and deepen significantly as it occludes, down to 933 millibars. The extratropical Atlantic record is 916 millibars. That was set on two different occasions, in 1986 and again in 1993. So we are a ways from that, but certainly this is going to have some huge impacts, and I'm sure the shipping routes are giving that a wide berth. Back behind it, a little bit of snow in Pennsylvania and New York. And then on the west coast, we have a new weather system heading into northwestern California and Oregon, and this will lay down a track of wintry weather across parts of the northwest. There's the jet stream configuration around midday today, and that's painting out ridging in the high plains and the Rockies, Colorado, and supporting that very warm weather in that part of the country. Troughing on the east coast, which in turn is supporting that frontal system off of the northeast coast, and that's the one that will be heading up there south of Greenland and producing those 930 millibar pressures. And then along the west coast, troughing there, supporting that frontal system that we have there in Oregon and northwest California. And that is a negative tilt trough. You can see that axis extending off to the southeast. The northeastern U.S. is under the influence of northwesterly flow and cold air advection. Classic cold air advection cumuliform clouds across Pennsylvania and New York, and that's due to that instability that we get in the lower levels as the cold air modifies over the relatively warm terrain. And then as we go into the evening, the infrared satellite imagery takes over, and we get this dull gray color. And that's because the temperatures on those cloud tops are not really all that cold. They're pretty close to maybe about 0 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So they blend in somewhat with the terrain down below. A winter weather advisory continues in the eastern mountains of West Virginia for this afternoon and early evening for 1 to 3 inches of snow. And in the North Carolina Blue Ridge Mountains could see a little bit of lingering snow through that area above 3,500 feet. In the southeastern U.S., a frost advisory for tonight. Looking at the Gainesville Waycross area, temperatures could be down into the lower 30s. Nothing to report in the southern plains, just southwesterly flow, which this time of year tends to be rather warm, and the dew points running about 20 to 30 degrees, which is going to be on the dry side. The northern plains, well, pretty warm there. We've got almost 60 degrees in North Dakota, but high wind warnings are in effect tonight and for Thursday. In the Front Range around Laramie, right in this area here, could see some gusts up near 65 to 70 knots. Those are going to be mostly in the higher elevations, and we could see some of those winds down into the Colorado Front Range. Again, those are going to be pretty high up there, above 8,000 feet, and confined mostly to the passes and the summits. But the Boulder area getting some gusts up near 40 miles an hour. In the southwestern U.S., a strong shortwave will be traversing North California. Let's take a look at that. There's the midday chart. Strong wave off of San Francisco, just off there to the west. And by evening, around the time you're watching this, that wave is moving inland. Some of the stronger lift heading rapidly into the Sierra Nevadas. Then by midnight, the lift moving into the Great Basin area. By tomorrow morning, moving into the northern Rockies, and then for midday, part of it heading up into Alberta, and another portion into the Dakotas. So this is very fast moving. Another way we can see this is with the Q vectors. And what we're going to watch here is the reddish shading, which indicates Q vector convergence. This is sampling the 400 through 700 millibar layer. So around midday today, we've got that lift working onshore. Then by evening, most of it concentrated around Sacramento and the central Sierra Nevadas. Moving inland towards Salt Lake City and Wendover for around midnight. Then by tomorrow morning, looks like the lift dampens a little bit, but starting to emerge out there into the high plains for later tomorrow. And another slug of lift working onshore right there. That's going to be with a occlusion that is currently well offshore. And we're talking about this weather system right here. That's the one that's going to show up for tomorrow. Flood watches this afternoon from northwestern California up the coast all the way to Seattle and Portland. In the Cascades and northern Sierras, we've got winter weather advisories. Could see 6 to 10 inches of snow above 6,500 feet. More winter weather advisories in northeastern Nevada and in the mountains of Idaho and Montana, and that's going to be for tomorrow and tomorrow night. Those areas could get about 2 to 5 inches on average. Heading up into Alaska, they've got their own weather system to contend with, an occlusion along the Gulf of Alaska coast, producing some wintry weather around Valdez, blizzard warnings in effect around Thompson Pass. Inland, number of winter weather advisories, mostly around the western coast area, from Newtok up to Nome and up to Point Lay, which is up here. They could see 4 to 6 inches of snow and blowing snow tonight and Thursday. Out there in Canada, rather mild conditions up in the Arctic. You can see we're up to 16 degrees up there at Pond Inlet, and that's fairly warm for this time of year. We head down south into the prairies, mild there as well, 20s and 30s. And we do have a winter storm watch for parts of southwestern Alberta, a little bit further south, actually around Cardston, out to Fort McLeod. Could see 12 inches of snow overnight and especially into tomorrow morning. And nothing much going on elsewhere around Canada, ridging into Quebec, shutting down the precipitation, but some lingering wintry weather in Newfoundland, with snow squalls around Bay St. George. Could see about 4 inches of snow in that area. So here's a very classic chart. This is the sea level pressure. The isobar is shown in black. And we've got the 1,000 through 500 millibar thickness, which gives us an idea of the average temperature in the lowest 5 kilometers. We see a transition zone right there representing some sort of frontal boundary, and another one on the west coast. So those are tied to the frontal systems that we're looking at today. No temperature contrast further to the south, so this is all rather homogeneous air mass. And a quick ballpark of where the fronts are. There's a frontal boundary right there. Probably a cold front through here, warm front down south, occlusion up north, and this is a stationary front up there in Oregon, and that extends south as a cold front. I've gone kind of in the middle of this frontal transition zone because it does differ a little bit from the classic model. Typically you put the fronts out ahead of the transition zone, but I was looking at some other products earlier today, and I do know that that surface front is lagging a little bit. And the other front down to the south, that's way off south of Florida, and that's that big transition zone north of that. Okay, there's our cross sections. We're looking west. Down here, that's the south part of the chart. There's the north part around Maine and Quebec. And we've got cold air sitting out over this area right here, where the isotropes, the black lines, where they are bumped up, forming this pile that is kind of displaced upwards, that represents cold air. This is warm air. So this is a layer of tropical air overlying colder air. Let's head into the East Coast region. We start to get further behind that cold front. An inversion above that modification layer, and warmer air starting to show up in the mid-levels. Heading into the Chicago, Memphis, Gulfport area, this is what the cross-section looks like. Definite inversion, warm air above that. And I'm calling that warm air because, well, we can't really tell that looking at the cross-section. We would have to go to a skew-t, but let's do that. Let's go to Memphis and look at a skew-t. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, there we go. There's our skew-t. Cold air from 700 millibars down to the surface. Lots of modification taking place in the lowest 3,000 feet. But in the upper levels, this is a very warm air mass that's tied into that ridging aloft. And on this one, we can tell it's warm because if we bring this down, not really dry adiabatically, but a little bit less than that, maybe something like this, that intersects at about 28 degrees Celsius, which is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So if this was all one homogeneous air mass tied in with the upper levels, this would be very warm. So returning to this, that's a warm air mass, and this is cold, and this is the transition zone. All right, heading further west, that transition zone gets closer to the ground, kind of piles in right there and eventually intersects it completely, and the ground rises up to meet it. And then we get into the Rockies. Now we've lost that cold air mass. This is all warm air. And we start to approach that Pacific system, start to pick up some moisture, jet stream energy up there over Idaho and Oregon. And then we start approaching that Pacific system. The humidity start coming up, and we get some slope in those isotropes, indicating some dynamic weather processes taking place. That would be around San Francisco. Okay, another way we can take a look at this is with a east-west cross-section. This is new. We haven't done this before. So we start out across Mexico. There's the Mexican Sierra Madres. We head north. Now we're over Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi. That's that cold air mass down below that red line. This is the transition zone. And down here is where the modification has taken place. So basically, this is all cold air. There's the warm air above that. And heading north, we start picking up that Pacific system off the left side of the chart. That's going to be California and Oregon, but really not enough detail on the edge to really resolve that. In the northern U.S., we pick up that transition zone right there. So that's going to be the cold air mass and a jet right above that. And here's another way to visualize those fronts. Cold air mass, cold air, this is where the modification has taken place. Transition zone up there near the frontal surface itself. And this is where we see the packing of those isotropes. So you're going to see those lines very close together. Not so much down in the cold air mass, they tend to become a little bit more vertical on those cross-sections. And then above that, the isotropes are spaced apart. And that spacing does not indicate warm air. It indicates a steeper lapse rate, which we usually find in that cold air. Okay, we're running out of time, so let's take a quick look at the forecast. Starting out this evening, looking at the sea level pressure, 1,000 through 500 millibar thickness, and precipitation, and the surface winds. That Pacific weather system moving inland, plenty of precip, and in the higher elevations, snow. And moving quickly to the east, by tomorrow morning, lots of snow from western Montana through Yellowstone Park down to Salt Lake City, And you can see that packing of the thickness lines right there, indicating where the front is located. So I think that is our front, making its way through the Great Basin area and into the Rockies. Warm air advection on the plains, pushing that warm front to the north. So about like that. So the system is coming together, troughing along the high plains, and then going into tomorrow. This is how it looks during the evening. Front moving through the northern plains, warm front through Minneapolis and Chicago. Could be a very warm day in that part of the Corn Belt. And then going into Friday, when we return for the weathercast, some dynamic weather in the central U.S., Pacific front sinking into the southwestern states. Then for Saturday, big old cold front moving through the Mississippi River Basin, through the central plains, and into Texas. So by evening, Saturday, we're looking at this. Looks like the start of a squall line there in Mississippi. Some showers all the way up to Ohio. And the warm front, not really sure where that is. Kind of a uniform thickness gradient out there on the East Coast. But much colder in some parts of the country, the Midwest and the central U.S. for this weekend. And then going into next week, we'll just run through this quickly. You can pick out your favorite area. Looks like a large anticyclone across much of the country. Moderating conditions for late in the week and some sort of Gulf system. Looks like the main impacts will be in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and Georgia. All right, that will do it for this edition of Forecast Lab. Once again, I want to thank Greg for the great aerial footage around San Antonio taken just a few days ago. And a special thanks to our newest Patreon supporter, Rahan Ozturk. Thank you very much for your Patreon support, and welcome to the program. Okay, everybody else, we'll see you back here on Friday for another edition. Take care. Bye-bye.